Hi, I'm just a tiny bit late today, but welcome to the Gender Speaker live show. We're talking today about unconscious bias and hidden prejudice. Hi, just a few little technical challenges there to get going, but here we are talking about hidden prejudice and unconscious bias. And in fact, all this week, I'm going to be looking at some of the more work-related aspects of gender issues, not just transgender, not just non-binary, but across the board. In fact, we're going to be looking at it's probably slightly broader anyway, because I'm talking about the Equality Act, which covers all of the protected characteristics. And I want to show how those protected characteristics sort of intersect. That's the current buzzword that we need to be learning about this, the intersectionality of all of the various different strands that are going on. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can have a little look at some of these. I might make this a little bit bigger in a minute just so we can see, because I want to talk through some of the things about unconscious bias and hidden prejudice. First of all, what do we mean by that? What is unconscious bias? What is hidden prejudice? Well, hidden prejudice is probably easy to see. When all the legislation started to come out, the changes in the Equality Act, and I'm going to look at that again later in the week, but essentially what happened, 114 separate pieces of legislation were all combined over a period of about 10 years. Everything was reconfigured into a single overarching piece of legislation covering all aspects of diversity and equality. Huge task, mammoth task. Very well achieved, but unfortunately, the day the Equality Act received its royal assent was the same day Gordon Brown called an election, which he lost, which meant that having spent 10 years putting the Equality Act together, the Labour Party then lost control of implementing it, and that was handed over to the Conservative Party. Well, a little help from the Liberal Democrats to try and keep them in check. But ultimately, it wasn't a piece of legislation the Conservative Party particularly favoured. They battled against it quite a lot. So it didn't really get a good start. It's never really got properly embedded. It's there, but a lot of people have never really got to grips with it. And I'm going to look at that in a little bit more detail. But once you have a set of rules that says this is illegal, you cannot discriminate in this way, you cannot discriminate in that way, and that is illegal, and then a few people get taken to court, well, eventually everybody gets the message, whoa, let's bury this. Let's not talk about let's not do this discrimination, because we know that's going to be trouble. We're going to get into all kinds of mess. So people know that they can't keep their job. They can't stay in work if they are openly and overtly prejudiced, if they discriminate in an open way against people who are black, who are Muslim, who are disabled, who are transgender, who are gay. If they discriminate in that way, they know they will actually lose their job or they will have a bad time. So they don't. Doesn't mean they don't feel discrimination. Doesn't mean they don't have that prejudice still there. Doesn't mean the cultural attitude that's been with them all their life has gone away. It's just a piece of law that says don't do it. Basically what it says is don't get caught. And that's what people do. They hide it. I still feel bad about these people. I'm still not comfortable about people coming into our country. I'm still not comfortable about gay people. I'm not comfortable about trans people. But okay, I can't discriminate. They will privately. They will, in conversations. You'll hear it in the bars. You'll hear it in various places, but it's suppressed. The problem is that this stuff seethes underneath. Every time they feel that something's going on, that somebody who is in a minority group is getting benefit, is being given some privilege, that seething comes out. And I think what we saw in 2016 when the Brexit, when the referendum election went in favour of Brexit, it was almost as if, because there had been a very strong immigration sense to the whole Brexit policy. I know people say there isn't, but yeah, there was. and I've had it openly discussed, that there was a big sense that Brexit somehow was going to stop the immigration, stop lots of people coming in from all around the world. It's not, but it's going to manage it in a different way, but it isn't going to really make that much difference, I don't think, because we live in a global world, global economy. We all want to go elsewhere, and other people want to come here. But what that did was to almost start to say it's okay. You can speak this, you can say this. And what we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years, 4 years really, is this increasing sense that not being allowed to talk about this is wrong. That is somehow, well, it is breaching our right to freedom of speech. And so we have seen increasing numbers of people coming out and being very vocal about their attitudes towards various different parts of the diversity agenda. And, we know that right-wing politics has been largely against what they see as political correctness. And in some ways, I think on the other side, there are people who support the equality program who have been overzealous in their attempts to implement equality law. We've got to get a balance. And I'm going to come to bias in a minute. Prejudice is a slightly different thing. Prejudice means you've got this negative feeling and this sense that somehow these people don't have the same rights, aren't supposed to be there, shouldn't be there. It's okay to discriminate against them. It's wrong because of a religious belief, because of a national belief, because of a whatever. So that's hidden prejudice. Hidden prejudice largely means hiding a prejudice, which would be illegal if you expressed it. Bias is different. So let's have a look at bias. Bias is allowing personal judgments or prejudices to influence you in an unfair way. Now, let's be clear. When I say in an unfair way, let's bring it up a little bigger. An unfair way doesn't necessarily mean in a negative way. So bias is part of who we are. It's part of our human culture. We are biased. And not only that, I worked in marketing for a long time, and the sole purpose of marketing is to bias people in favor of the products or product range. I was a product manager and then a product director, manager, marketing executive. And my goal was to get people to buy our products over somebody else's. When you go into a supermarket, let's just say you're looking for a tin of beans. You go along a shelf and you look for beans. Now, if you go into a big store like Tesco or Morrison's where you've got multiple brands, you look around and, oh my God, you've got 6 different brands. You've got Cross and Blackwell is there. You've got Heinz there. You've got a Morrison's own brand there. You've got one you never heard of before. God, what's that? That's German. Oh, yeah. So you've got dozens of different. And oh my God, what's that? Oh, that's got sausages in it. So you've got all these variations of what you want, what you might want to buy. So you could stand there and think, beans, God, which should I have? Look at the packets, see what sugar levels are. You could spend 10, 15 minutes just trying to figure out which packet of beans that you're going to buy, or tin of beans. And it could be a packet. Bear in mind, it's Tetra Packs. So what happens is the marketing basically tries to convince you that beans means Heinz. I know, yeah, that's it. It's the advertising. It's 1 million households every day pick up a tin of beans and say beans means Heinz. Why do I remember that? Oh, God. Only Heineken can do this because Heineken reaches the... Yeah, these are why advertising works. What it's trying to do is embed in your head a bias, a conscious bias that when you go and look, boom, the advertising springs. You think, oh, yeah, I'll do that. That's the one. Quick decisions. So biases help us all the time, help us in ways you can't believe. So all the time we have strong biases. We have a bias in favor of science, a bias in favor of arts. We all are biased in one way or another. That is the human condition. And that's the thing you got to remember, is that because we have that human condition, there's nothing wrong with being biased. The problem is when you're not aware of that bias and when you make decisions that are actually now becoming unfair. Let me give you I don't know whether this is unfair. I used to work in a company where the managing director's father had been a prisoner of war in Japan. So he grew up with a very, very, very strong prejudice against Japanese. As a consequence, none of us in the company were allowed to have a Japanese company car, which we all felt was very unfair because actually the Japanese cars at the time, this was in the mid-80s, were better than most of the other cars available. You could get good quality cars at a relatively low price, all sorts of things. So what was happening was that a bias in this case, it was a bias in terms of purchasing no Japanese cars, was affecting the ability of us all to get a decent product. But it can happen, let's say, in recruitment, if you have a bias in favor of men over women. And let me tell you this, I'm going to look at this in a minute. 90% of the world's population have a bias when it comes to work in favor of men over women. 90%. And that's research just been published in March of this year across the world. The United Nations did this in, I think it was 80 countries. This is a lot. No, so 80% of the countries of the world were actually researched. Now, that's a huge amount. And that's women as well, not just men. Women are biased against women. And that makes it unfair for women. We cannot get gender equality when everybody thinks men are better. So this is the problem with bias. So let's just see what we can do as we have a look through a few other thoughts around bias and see what we can do. Here is an exercise I used to run. I do run when I'm running. Remember live workshops when you can actually go to a meeting and actually meet people and talk instead of doing it this way. So I just put this picture up and say, okay, fine, you walk into a meeting and you've got to go and find a seat and you look around the room and these people are sitting there. Now, without disclosing, I don't need you to disclose me. I can't see what you're saying or what you're thinking. Is there anybody there that you would think, oh my God, no, I'm not going to sit there? Is there anybody that you think, oh, I'll go and sit over there? I can tell you from having done this exercise that a significant majority, and I didn't do a full sort of detailed analysis of this, a significant majority of men of all ages chose to sit beside number 5. She's actually a young hairdresser. A quite significant majority of women didn't want to sit beside number 3, found that very uncomfortable. Quite a number of people didn't want to sit beside number 11. Others specifically wanted to. There was some conscious biasing there. Some people were not so happy about a Muslim. Some were not happy about a Sikh. Some were very happy. So people have their own biases. And I don't know what your biases are. It doesn't matter. What matters is you recognize them. Now, number 12, I want to talk about. Number 12 is a friend of mine. He's a speaker called W. Mitchell. And you can see, just looking at W. Mitchell, that his face is, had some bad times. It's a bit of a patchwork quilt, to be perfectly honest. And when I first met Mitchell 25 years ago, I first met him, and I was introduced, and I did not know what to say at all. I was absolutely stunned. I thought, oh my God. And there's no question, if I'd sort of gone to, I would have probably thought, oh no, I'm not going to sit beside him. I had the same issue. I was in a meeting with Simon Weston was there. Now I'd met Mitchell, I was much more comfortable. But there are people who have been severely, damaged by fire damage in this case. Mitchell had a motorcycle accident, was hit by a truck on a junction. His bike went down the road, trapped his leg under it. Petrol cap flew off, petrol all over the place. Sparks ignited the flame, turned him into a ball of fire. He should have died. Nobody expected him to live, but they managed to remove pieces of skin from parts of the bodies. There weren't very many of them, but parts of the body that hadn't been burnt. And using a photograph, a surgeon reconstructed his face to something that looked fairly similar to what it had been before. And he took this, he actually handled this. Mitchell stood for election as local governor under the banner, W. Mitchell, not just another pretty face. He's a man with a sense of humor. He's a friend of Tony Robbins, and he usually used his passion as a speaker to get things. He just bought a plane, learned to fly a plane, crashed the plane, broke his back, put himself in a wheelchair. He's probably one of the top speakers in the world. He teaches a simple message. It's not what happens to you that matters. It's what you do about it. But that's not the important thing about my story with Mitchell. It's how he dealt with me. So before I changed gender, he said, Ricky, come here, sit down. And he told me his story, the story I've just told you about what happened to him. Within a couple of minutes, all of my concerns, all of my seeing this man and this patchwork quilt of a man, I didn't know whether his hands are not really hands. They're sort of reconstructions that look almost like stubs that enable him to function. Very quickly it disappeared, and suddenly this wonderful, warm, loving man beneath it came out, and I could see him, and I suddenly learned something. If people have a problem with who you are just because of who you are, then the best thing you can do is take responsibility for making them comfortable about who you are. And that's what he did. He didn't wait around to see whether, I would, just push off and not bother to talk to him. He made that happen. And I had a long-term friendship with him. The same thing about I learned as I came out as a trans person. I learned the same thing. If people are uncomfortable about me being trans, then the best thing for me to do is help them to be comfortable, help to make them comfortable about who I am. So that's my first thought about, working with unconscious bias. I had a bias. It was against, the fact that I was uncomfortable with people physically deformed, didn't know how to deal with that. Mitchell helped me to learn how to deal with that in a very big way. And it impacts so many people who are disabled. People with cerebral palsy, people with missing limbs. Yeah, it's something that we find uncomfortable. The only way to deal with it is to recognize that, if it's you, help other people to be comfortable. If it's you and your problem, then get to know somebody. See past the exterior and find the person beneath, because underneath is a beautiful person. So here's some examples of gender bias I thought you might be interesting. Leaders are expected to be assertive. That's a general expect. Now, I'm not saying everybody says that's the rule, but when we think about leaders, we think about people who are assertive and make decisions, who make things happen. So a woman being more collaborative, and a lot of women have a more collaborative style of leadership, but that is perceived as weak leadership. Not by everybody, but by quite a lot of people perceive collaborativeness as a weak leadership. However, if a woman decides, therefore, rather be collaborative, she'll be assertive. Well, when a woman is assertive, that's perceived as aggressive, not as assertive. The same level of assertiveness exhibited by a woman as would be expected with a man is actually seen negatively. So can you see how inherent in the sense of what we expect of a leader is an unconscious bias against women in leadership? And it's happening all the time. Add to this another stat: 60% of chief executive officers are 6 foot or taller. 60% are 6 foot or taller. I'll put this on a full screen so you can see it. 60% of CEOs are 6 foot or taller. Now, 14.5% of men are 6 foot or taller. So already we see there's actually a bias against men in favor of height. That if you are taller, you have a much, much bigger chance of actually getting senior leadership roles, because we somehow correlate height with ability to lead. Yet there's absolutely no correlation. There's absolutely nothing at all to demonstrate that taller men do a better job of leadership than shorter men. Not one single piece of realistic data has ever been produced to support that idea. It is pure bias. Now, here's the challenge for women. If we see height as being a quality of leadership, 1% of women are 6 feet or taller. So women have got a much, much less chance of men of getting into lead, which is why they're out of the Fortune 500 companies. I think we've got 5 or 6 women are actually running those companies. So that sort of goes up and down, but it's not very many. And unfortunately, also, tall women are not perceived particularly well. It's getting better as more and more women are taller. But I talked to a lot of taller women, and they've said they have huge problems about being accepted. It makes people uncomfortable, whereas tall men make people comfortable. Very, very strange. Now, this figure around 90% of women, 90% of the world are biased against women. This is UN research. They believe overall, I haven't got the exact figures from this. I looked at just the executive report, which didn't have the exact figures here, but it was saying within that is this sense that people believe men are better as politicians. Men are better business leaders. University is more important to men, despite the fact that actually women get more degrees and better degrees than men. And men should get preferential treatment in competitive job markets. Now, that's really important because right now we have a problem, don't we? We've had a huge number of people out of work. We've had companies all over the world closing down. So there's going to be a huge surfeit of people looking for jobs right now. And what the biases says is around the world, this is going to be a bad time for women. It will be a bad time for trans women for the same reason, because people will assume women actually don't. It's not so important. It's more important to make sure that men have jobs, despite the fact that actually it's women are very often that are supporting and looking after their families, single parent families. All right, stereotypes. Now, this is another factor which builds into biases. Is the fact that we think all the time in terms of stereotypes. I'm just taking my time here, so I don't want to go over too late, but I am already. How are we doing? Right, let's just think about these. This is the ones I use in one of my workshops. Just get thinking about it. Nurse, rich kid, Africa, transvestite, engineer, English tourist. These are just a random selection. What are the messages? What are the thoughts that go into your head? I ask people to sort of write these down. Just give three words that they think about when they think about English tourist. Is it a positive or a negative image? Engineer, almost always people think men. Always people think it's a bit mucky, a bit dirty. It's all about sort of grease and getting under the bonnet. And we tend to think actually engineering isn't necessarily that. There's lots of engineering that's extremely clean, bioengineering, for example, a lot of women involved in that. But we tend to think of engineers as men. And these are biases it's taking a long time to remove. Transvestite, we tend to think of old men overdressed in women with too much makeup and such like. So the term transvestite has gone out of fashion because the stereotype was so negative that nobody wanted to be in any way associated with that. So now people call themselves gender incongruent, gender variant, anything but not transgender mostly, but anything but not transvestite. So where do our attitudes come from? I want to show you an interesting thing here. Our attitudes come obviously from media, from our parents, from our friends and children, from things you read. But actually what's happened is biases are embedded into everything we learn and study and see all the time. There are biases in every movie. And you all know the old story, don't you? That women are always the prize, and it's men who are always on the journey to achieve something. Very seldom is a woman the prize. Very seldom is a woman really the hero of the story. Women tend to, and action movies, a woman is always in there just as, a little bit of an aside, something to entertain the men. This is a map. This is the Mercator map. It's been around since 1500s. It was used for navigation around the world when the New World was being discovered and exploited by the Europeans. And it's been cut off a bit at the bottom, to be perfectly honest. This one, I was looking for one that had Antarctica. But what you'll notice is that it's biased, hugely biased. Not going to go into full details of it, but we've got 7 continents. At the bottom, we've got Antarctica, we've got South America, North America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and Eurasia on the side there. So what's that big island up at the top there? Can you see that? Right at the top, Greenland. Why isn't that a continent? I mean, God, it's bigger than South America. Why is that not a continent? You think, well, it's got to be a continent. Well, it's not. It's not a continent because the whole of the map has been stretched at the top. And it's been stretched out so that Russia and Canada and everything looks a lot bigger, but particularly Greenland. Greenland is 1/7 the size of South America. And yet it looks enormous. And that's because we stretched the map in order to make all maps are distorted because you're taking a globe and flattening it out. But ours is also distorted because what's right in the middle of it? Well, of course, Britain's right in the middle of it because this is a map that was basically used for the Europeans, and Britain and Europe is right slap bang in the centre of the map. You think of the equator. The equator is across the middle of the map, but I say this is slightly distorted anyway because the bottom's been cut off. But if you take the middle of the map, well, that would make Britain a subtropical climate, and we know that it's not. Might be becoming so, but no. The reality is that the equator, the middle point, is 2/3 of the way down this map, not halfway down the map, because the whole top has been expanded to make the north bigger. And as I say, Europe is in the middle. If you look at the map that you'd get if you were in America, you'll notice it's different. America's in the middle. And you've got Russia on the left and Russia on the right. Americans feel they're surrounded. By the way, sorry, my dog suddenly decided to have a little go at the builders. Just 1 second, I'm going to close the door to keep it a little quieter. Sorry about that. And now, this is a map called the Peters map, and which is actually been redrawn to show the actual relative size of all of those land masses. Still distorted, looks very odd, but it is distorted. Can you see how big Africa and South America are now? How small Britain and Europe and even North America is? They're tiny by comparison to these huge land masses of South America, Africa, and Asia. That's the reality of what they all are. And of course, if you live in Australia, you have a whole different view of the world. Who said North has to be at the top? So can you see how maps constantly distort our picture and view of the world? We see Europe and America and the West as dominant, but actually the reality is if we saw the maps properly, it's what we call the third world, which is the dominant in terms of size. And when you look at population, that's exactly what the case is. The big populations are in Africa, Latin America, Asia, and China. If you want to look at your biases, how much are you biased? What's here? The best place to go is have a look at implicit.harvard.edu/implicit. Implicit association tests. And what these do is they check microsecond differences in the time in which it takes for you to respond to things. And that produces a sense of how biased you are. I was very, very biased against women. I was very biased in favor of LGBTQ people. And knowing your biases means that you can do something to start taking account of it. Think about the impact on relationships. If you don't like someone, if somebody makes you uncomfortable, these are the sorts of things that you will tend to do. You'll avoid them, cross the street, go a different way, hope they don't see you. You use less eye contact, shorter communications. Let's get this over quickly. You smile less, you listen less. Your rapport is nowhere near as good. If it's a customer, you're slower to follow up on the customer that you don't like, that you feel uncomfortable with. And that slowness, that less eye contact, those shorter communications, that sense that this isn't a comfortable conversation results in more hostility towards you from other people, more likely to have complaints because they don't feel that there was a bond, that there was a relationship, less likely to cooperate. And you'll get a lot of negative body language. So can you see, just simply having an unconscious bias or some kind of hidden prejudice will result in those sorts of differences that mean the other person will pick that up. And when they pick that up, then they will respond in a more negative way towards you. In the workplace, it's also important because if you have bias within the workplace, it results in favoritism, lowers or raises expectations, because bear in mind, bias can be positive or negative. So I was talking previously about negative bias, but in the workplace, you've got both are equally as damaging. Favoring someone over somebody else causes all kinds of conflict within the workplace. It reduces rapport, motivation, or gets more people, some people motivated, other people not. You've got all challenges of inclusion and exclusion. If one person is excluded, it's so easy to make people feel they're not part of it. Everybody goes down the pub and you suddenly learn they've all gone and nobody invited you. Or there's a party happening and you find out afterwards. And I've had those kind of things happen to me. you get this in-group versus out-group, and that's really a very toxic environment. Where you've got a group of people who are, and I saw this happening when the rules and laws on smoking came in, where you couldn't smoke in the office. What I noticed was happening was that a group of people who smoked were taking a break to go out and smoke. And of course, the non-smokers didn't really want to be there because they didn't enjoy the smoke environment anyway. But what started to happen was a group was forming that was sharing ideas, sharing thoughts, getting involved with people. All the smokers were beginning to interact in a social way. And actually, that was helping their work. And there was stuff happening in those smoking groups that wasn't getting back into the other groups. So what we had was this break. So it's important for something as simple as that, not to allow it to create an us and them group. And I'll go into a little bit more of some of this on social identity, gossip, bullying, discrimination claims. So those are the sorts of challenges that you might get. Let's take us back to me again. Here we are. So I'm going to bring us to a close today because I know I'm running way over, but it's a big topic. And as you can see, and I've just done a tiny little bit of what's normally a half-day workshop. And I hope it's helped you to understand a little bit more that unconscious bias is not something to be afraid of, but it's something to be aware of. You have to embrace it, understand your biases, understand your prejudices, and do what you can to prevent them from becoming a problem, from creating toxicity, exclusion within the workplace, and you'll create a much more effective and inclusive environment. Okay, I've run over. We're 31 minutes today. Hope to see you again tomorrow when I'm going to be looking at a little bit more of the issues of discrimination, harassment in the workplace. 4:00 tomorrow. Look forward to seeing you then. Take care.